Hey guys, this is Nirupam with the Underwater Photography Guide and Blue Water Photo. I'm here today with the Sony FX3. It's Sony's lowest end cinema line camera, but also probably one of the best underwater cameras for underwater video. It's basically a Sony A7S III packed into a cinema type body. Now what does that mean for you as an underwater videographer? Not much. There are a few differences from the Sony A7S III, but this review is going to be a little bit shorter than my other review. You can check out my Sony A7S III review, that's 40 minutes, in the link below. But I'm going to quickly go through what are the main differences between the Sony FX3 and the Sony A7S III, which one should you choose for underwater video, and show you a few of my video clips that I've taken with the Sony A7S III. I'm not gonna take this back underwater right now just because what's the point? The video is gonna look exactly the same as you would get with the A7S III. It's the same sensor, it's the same internals, same specs, the menus look the same, everything's the same. There's just a difference in the button orientation. It's a cinema line body. There's a few more things that you can do with this camera above water. And most importantly, there is a built-in fan. So because there's a built-in fan, there might be longer recording times, but we'll talk about that. Now let's get into the review. Alright, so you saw the video, you saw how awesome this camera really is. As I said before, it's the same as the A7S III, so let's go over some of those top features right now. Now, the FX3 can shoot 4K up to 120 frames per second internally with 10-bit 422 color sampling. So if you want to push those log profiles and get some dynamic range in your video, you can definitely do that with this camera. It can shoot S-Log, S-Log2, S-Log3, HLG. So there's a wide range of picture profiles that you can use while you're filming. There's also a wide range of codecs, which is why I really love the camera. You have a lot of shooting options. You can decide what your compression rates are for easier editing in the future and just to save storage space on your camera. The sensor itself is almost on a gyroscope. It kind of moves around when you move the camera. That's called 5-axis in-body image stabilization. This camera has that, and it also has active steady shot stabilization, which works great underwater. And I was using that quite often for run and gun shooting, you know, because you're not always on a tripod underwater, you're kind of moving around in that three-dimensional environment. So it's great to have that stabilization built in. Now, one of the coolest things about the FX3 is that it has not a true dual gain ISO sensor, but in reality, that sensor does act as a dual gain sensor, which means that you've got a base ISO at around 100, and then you have another base ISO at about 12,800. So once you hit that 12,800 mark, your noise gets reduced significantly, and it's like almost like you're starting over at your base ISO, and you can shoot at much higher ISOs a lot better. And that's why we originally called the Sony A7S III the low light king. The FX3 has the same title because it's the same camera. Now, let's talk about some of those differences between the FX3 and the A7S III. The first difference is this is clearly a cinema line body, which means you have some mounts on the top for some accessories. The camera actually comes with a handle, a carrying handle, which obviously you can't take that underwater, but then you can take nice stable video above water. It has extra tally lights, especially on the front, but it has tally lights everywhere, on the back, on the side, I think on the side. Anyway, there's lots of tally lights, and that basically tells you when you're filming. Will that help you underwater? Probably not, unless you have an Ike housing which has a clear back. Most housings, you might be able to actually see the tally light in some of them. There is a tally light right above the LCD, so really depends on your housing, but you might know when it's filming, you might not. I wouldn't count on it, just to be safe, but there are more tally lights. The FX3 is also missing the viewfinder. Now, that's totally fine if you're an underwater shooter. I know a lot of people made a big deal about this for topside shooting, that, you know, some people use viewfinders when they're filming, but really, underwater, it's fine not having a viewfinder. You're looking through the LCD anyway in most cases. So I think that is space saved, and I'm happy about that. The camera itself is actually smaller and lighter, though it is a little bit thicker. And the reason it's thicker is actually the most important feature, which is this new fan, this built-in fan. Will the built-in fan extend your recording times? Theoretically, yes. In reality, it's hard to say. So one of the things that I've really noticed when the A7S III came out, when the Canon R5 came out, is that these cameras overheat, and it really depends on the water temperature. So in most cases, if you're in 80-degree water, you might only get a few minutes of filming, especially if you're at 4K 120 frames per second or 8K 30. This camera only does 4K, but when you're shooting at 120 frames per second, that's a lot of processing power. It takes a lot of battery and it heats up the camera. This camera will film for longer, but I have been getting reports that at 80 degrees, this camera really only lasts about 20 minutes, which for some people that's fine. I mean, 20 minutes of 4K 120p footage is probably about 300 gigabytes. So if you have the space for that, that's awesome, but your camera might actually overheat after 20 minutes. Now, if you're in colder water, it's probably gonna last a lot longer, and I would imagine maybe 40 minutes, maybe an hour. So it really depends. I never have problems with my cameras overheating here in the Pacific Northwest, where the water temperature is, 48 to 55 degrees. That being said, I do have those problems when I do my photo workshops in Mexico. And then I think in some cases, especially with the R5, I might last only 7 minutes. In this case, I think you can expect a good 20 minutes at 4K 120 in warm water. I probably wouldn't anticipate having much more than that. Maybe you could push it to 30, maybe 40, but again, it really depends on that water temperature. So it's not quite as resilient as you might think to overheating, even with the built-in fan. That being said, it's a better option than the A7S III. If you're starting from scratch, you don't have a camera, you're only gonna shoot video, I'd say go for it. Go for the FX3, get a little bit of extra recording time, and I think it's well worth it. And the final difference is the FX3 has a zoom lever built in that works with a couple cinema line lenses. Now, one of these lenses is 16 to 35, I believe it's a T3.1, will work well underwater, but other lenses probably not, so it's not a deal breaker if you're looking at the A7S III versus the FX3. So let's do a quick recap on which camera I would choose for underwater video. If I was comparing the Sony A7S III and the FX3, I would choose the Sony FX3 if you don't already have a camera. I wouldn't upgrade from the A7S III. It's not really an upgrade, it's just a different body. But if you don't have a camera to begin with, the FX3 would be the choice because it does have that built-in fan. You might get a few more extra minutes of shooting. Other than that, there aren't too many advantages underwater. So it doesn't really matter. If you already have the A7S III, I wouldn't be worried about the FX3. I wouldn't even be watching this video. You know what you have in your camera and it works great. If I was going to choose between the Sony FX3 and the Sony A1, the FX3 might have a little bit longer recording time, especially at those, in 4K, but it doesn't have 8K, which is what the A1 has. I wouldn't choose the FX3 over the A1 if you're thinking, oh, well, I'll get more recording time and give up that 8K feature, but if you don't need 8K, sure, go with that Sony FX3. When it comes to underwater housings, we've got two brands available. We have a Nauticam housing for the FX3 and we have a Merlux housing for the FX3. Merlux is a pretty new brand. We're pretty excited about that housing. We have those both available and in stock. We have the camera in stock. We've got Sony lenses. There are some supply chain issues with the FX3 this winter. It's kind of hard to get cameras anywhere you go and look for them. We've been getting them in, which has been awesome. So make sure you check us out. Drop a comment below if you have any questions. You can email us at sales@bluewaterphotostore.com. We'd be happy to answer any questions. We'd be happy to get you set up with a housing. With that, I'm gonna leave it here. That's the Sony FX3. We hope you get some awesome footage while you're diving with that. And until then, we'll see you on our next dives.